Welcome back to Bumblebee. Today's video is on the top 10 outlaws from the Wild West that did unspeakable things. Outlaw number 10 is John Liver Eatin' Johnson. This story varies in detail per account, but overall consensus is the same. Some dude John head west to prospect for gold, where his wife is allegedly killed by a Crow brave. Alleged because she was also Crow clan, so it doesn't make much sense why that would happen. A grief-stricken John then decides to go on a slaying an estimated 300 Crow braves, and allegedly eating their livers, partially due to the fact that the Crow clan believed that the liver was necessary anatomy for them to go on to the next life, but also because he was deranged and gross. Somehow, Johnson made peace with the Crows after a decade or so, but he hadn't lost his taste for human livers. So, he targeted the Sioux Nation next, who didn't do anything to him. They just happened to be indigenous and nearby as he roamed Montana with other mountain men. They didn't share his man-eater tendencies, but they sure as hell wrote about him. One story recounted an obituary for Johnson on February 11th of 1900 tells how a group of mountaineers watched Johnson track down a badly injured Sioux warrior using his blood trail, only to scalp and behead the poor man before cutting him open to reach for the liver, which he then ate raw and offered to the horrified spectating mountaineers, and was offended when they said nah, as if they hadn't just watched him dog the bounty hunter a guy and then behead and eat him. What's most shocking, or not really, seeing how indigenous folks are treated in the Americas, is the whole eating human liver thing was actually viewed by mainstream society as a joke. In 1893, Johnson wrote to the Billings Times declaring that he was trying to quit Indians and eating their livers. The paper issued a sarcastic response. We congratulate him on his abandonment of Indian livers. They are not indeed in the menu of a good healthy Montanian, and so long as Mr. Johnson is trying to live without them, we shall offer our best encouragement. Alright. Outlaw number 9 is Bill Miner. This fellow was originally from Kentucky and earned himself the nickname of the Gentleman Bandit. Miner's life of crime began in the US in the 1800s. He was known for robbing stagecoaches, something which he got caught for and eventually sentenced to 25 years in California prison in 1881. When he emerged from prison in 1902, trains had largely replaced stagecoaches, and so he replaced his typical target with a new one, committing one of Canada's very first ever train robberies in 1904 near Mission, BC at the age of 60. Miner was reportedly the first hold-up artist to use hands up as well, coining the phrase, which was smeared all over newspapers and became the signature phrase to inform someone, hey yeah, this is a robbery. Bill's second train victim was outside Kamloops in 1905. When the law closed in on him, Miner tried to pew-pew his way free and he was caught and jailed. He later escaped the penitentiary in New Westminster, fleeing back to the US, where stories of his end varied. Weirdly, his story stuck with Canadians, and there's a bunch of folk songs and an orchestra and a PB-style movie dedicated to him, so yeah. Outlaw number 8 is Belle Starr. Born to a well-to-do Confederate sympathizing family, we all know what that's code for. Myra Maybelle Shirley Starr, the Bandit Queen, was a teenage in Syene, Texas in 1864 when outlaws Jesse James and the Younger brothers used her family home as a hideout. Having been born and raised in a boring white bread family, Belle saw the outlaw life that many were forced to turn to for literal survival through her entitlement glasses. It's all a silly little adventure and causing problems for fun. So naturally, she clung on to the gangle and went with them. In the years that followed, Starr married 3 outlaws. Jim Reed in 1866, who ran with the Younger, James, and Starr gangs before being in 1874 by police. Then we have Bruce Younger of the Younger Gang in 1878, and then we have Sam Starr of the Starr Gangs in 1880. Turns out Belle was a hell of a homie hopper. After Belle and Sam were later charged with horse stealing, a federal offense for which she served time, she was again charged with horse theft in 1886. This time, because of her legal skills, she was acquitted. The legal skills Belle had in question was being a white woman with a lot of money. She would use her money liberally to bribe the freedom of any gang members who were captured. Failing this, she would tempt the lawman with her womanly charms, almost always achieving her ends, the release of her compatriots. Belle was involved in many petty crimes like bootlegging and horse theft, but always wormed her way out of it while others around her consistently went down for crimes. It all ended, however, when her final and significantly younger husband, Jim July, who threatened Belle's life a mere week before she showed up. Legendsofamerica.com says there's a few suspects. Belle had caught July fooling around with a young Cherokee girl, which led to troubles in paradise. Belle was estranged from her son Ed, and rumors speculate she may have had an adult relation with him. Even Pearl, her daughter, might have mother because Belle had interfered with Pearl's own marriage. Outlaw number 7 is the Benders. This is such a classic Wild West story, you may have heard it by now, but if not, it goes a little something like this. In the 1870s, the Union had not only won, but forcefully displaced the Osage indigenous out of Labette County to make way for the white settlers to take their land. That sentence tastes like bile. And wouldn't you know it, the Benders were one of the several families glad to start a new life in the West. It was 60-year-old John Bender Sr., his wife Elvira, and their children John Bender Jr. and Kate. This is hard to determine since later rumors circulated that Kate was in a relationship with her brother, or that he wasn't actually a family member at all, or both. Anyways, the family built a wooden cabin, barn, corral next to the Great Osage Trail, which a stream of people made their way through Kansas seeking their fortune prospecting, which they soon realized was an untapped market. The cabin was divided with opaque canvas sheets, so that front of house was a grocery business and back was a bed for weary travelers. From 1871 to 73, several people making their way along the Great Osage Trail were reported missing. Given the prevalence of bandits and criminals and disease and the risk of accidents, nobody assumed it could be a family in the community that could be responsible. But after a big cheese goes missing, it's time for a cabin search, and the Benders have to flee overnight. When their cabin in the surrounding area is investigated, up to 11 bodies are found in the small orchard. Turns out the guests would sit at the family table a la Sweeney Todd, and someone would creep up behind them and either bash their head in or slit their throat. The body was then dropped through a trap door to a rudimentary cellar below and stripped of all clothing and valuables. In 1897, the Oswego Independent quoted from Captain W.H. Ward, former private secretary of the governor of Kansas, who admitted the Benders had gotten away, but some of them might still be alive. He pointed to what he believed was a reliable statement by a convict in the Michigan State Penitentiary in Detroit, who gave very detailed account as to how the Benders had escaped with the help of Apaches and assumed fake identities. Outlaw number 6 is Albert Johnson, better known as the Mad Trapper of Rat River. He triggered a massive manhunt and captured the public's imagination during the Great Depression. It starts on the 25th of December. Local First Nation trappers complained to the RCMP that Johnson had been interfering with their trap lines. So, on the 31st of December, 1931, an RCMP constable investigating a complaint was popped. He didn't die, but he was seriously wounded and shocked. The RCMP were astounded that this Johnson person would fire at an officer over a minor issue like trapping violations, and it meant he was approached as dangerous and unstable in the ensuing manhunt, one of the largest in Canadian history. It lasted 48 days, covered 300 kilometers, all in temperatures averaging negative 40 Celsius. Before it was over, a second policeman is badly wounded, and another tentatively but never positively identified as Albert Johnson, was so skilled at outdoor Yukon survival, Bear Grylls style, that the police had to employ bush pilot Wilfred Wap May to track him. So, May spots him and directs foot patrol to Johnson's location, and he gives signals that finally help take Johnson down in a fatal shot to his spine. The trapper's extraordinary flight from the police across subarctic terrain in the dead of winter captured the attention of the nation and earned him the title the Mad Trapper of Rat River. To this day, there's no motive for his crimes and the escalation of him, and his identity remains a mystery. Outlaw number 5 is Delphine Lalaurie. In 1834, at the mansion 1140 Royal Street in the French Quarter of New Orleans, a fire broke out. The neighbors rushed to help the family evacuate. However, when they arrived, they noticed Madame Lalaurie, the wealthy socialite, seemed to be alone, until they searched the home anyways. And what they did find upstairs, hidden away in the attic, is a group of captive African peoples living in conditions so violently horrific that even the rich white folk of that time period forgot their racial biases for a second. Eyewitness claims that there were at least 7 people beaten, bruised, and bloodied within an inch of their lives. Their eyes were gouged out, skin is flayed, and mouths filled with excrement and then sewn shut. One woman had her bones broken and reset so she resembled a crab, and another woman was wrapped in human intestines. The witnesses also claimed that there were people with holes in their skulls and wooden spoons nearby to be used to stir their brains. It turns out one of the elderly captives had actually tried to burn the home down in an attempt to take her life. See, previously, Delphine had been caught forcing her captive workers through absolute living hell. She kept her 70-year-old cook chained to the stove, starving, and then there's the man who was so scared of punishment he threw himself out a 3rd-story window. Well, she's forced to give up all her captured Africans after witnesses see her burying the corpse of one who had taken their lives. Of course, the police all looked the other way when she purchased them back though, until they found out how monstrous she was behind closed doors, let alone in public. In a shocking act of compassion for these captured people, especially in 1830s, Delphine's neighbors actually formed a mob of over 400 people, smashed smashing windows, tearing down fences, doors, and shutters, driving the B-word and her family from their home. Outlaw number 4 is Bill Doolin, whose gang, the Wild Bunch, was actually who inspired Butch Cassidy. Also called the Oklahombres, Doolin's group gained reputation throughout Arkansas, Kansas, Indiana, and Oklahoma as stagecoach and train robbers. Following a train robbery, Doolin was shot in the foot and retreated to Ingalls, Oklahoma to heal, evade capture, and get married. His wife Edith had no idea until after the I do that she'd married an outlaw. That's a fun conversation to have on your wedding night. However, honeymoon doesn't last forever because 14 US Marshals come to town a few months later to apprehend Doolin and his homies. They thought they were subtle at first, camping out not far from Doolin's last location, but somebody's snot-nosed kid sees them and goes and snitches to Doolin, shouting that deputies are coming. And come the next day, September 1st, they came alright. Walked right into what's now known as the Battle of Ingalls. Doolin escaped and managed to avoid capture for another year with those of his gang who hadn't perished in the battle. Thanks to the hard work of the 3 guardsmen, most of that group had been wiped out. Knowing that his freedom was limited, Doolin made several offers to surrender in exchange for a light sentence, but his offers were rejected. So Bill rejected the offer to be arrested and simply took off with his wife to Eureka Springs to chug down some medicinal waters for his shot foot, which had developed rheumatism. But the tenacious guardsman Bill Tilgan tracked him all the way to resort, and in January of 1896, the famous lawman single-handedly captured the outlaw. Offering no resistance, Doolin's taken back to Oklahoma, jailed, promptly arranged a jailhouse riot, and he and 14 others escaped. This would be Bill's last, unfortunately, as when he's next found, they don't bother arresting him, just pump him full of lead. Local photographer takes a picture of his body, slapped it on a postcard, and Miss Doolin wrote a poem to go with it. This picture poem postcard sold at 25 cents a pop. Outlaw number 3 is John Wesley Hardin. Did he 20 men, 40, 50. The total body count may be unclear, but according to the famous words of John Wesley Hardin himself, I never killed anyone who didn't need. By all accounts, Hardin was one of the most dangerous slingers in American Southwest. When compared to John Wesley Hardin, Billy the Kid was rank amateur, wrote author Leif Lauren in his book about Hardin. By for the time that Wes Hardin reached his 21st birthday, he was credited with 27 kills already. Evidently, Hardin displayed his outlaw nature early. He jabbed a classmate as a schoolboy, a black man during an argument at 15, and as a supporter of the Confederacy, claimed the lives of multiple Union soldiers, according to the Texas State Historical Society. More than dozens of later, he surrendered in 1872, which was apparently for no reason because he broke out of jail, joined the anti-Reconstruction movement, and just kept on folks. Fleeing capture with his wife and children, he was nabbed by Texas Rangers in Florida in 1877 and sentenced to 25 years for the death of Charles Webb, a deputy sheriff. During his prison term, he tried repeatedly to escape, read theological books, served as a superintendent for the prison's Sunday school. He also studied law, showing he had range as a person. He also wrote his own autobiography, so Hardin's pardoned in, that rhymed, March 16th of 1894 and subsequently admitted to the bar. But life on the straight and narrow doesn't last long. According to Society, Hardin hired to slay one of his clients whose wife he was having an affair with. And so on August 19th, 1895, Constable John Salmon, one of the hired weapons, Hardin's in the Acme Saloon. Ironically, it's believed because he hadn't paid for the hit job. Outlaw number 2 is Levi Helm. Levi Boone Helm was a mountain man and slinger, but he's best known as the Kentucky Man-Eater, for, you guessed it, man-eating. Boone was part of a group that would steal and slay all over Oregon and Idaho, but Boone had been a longtime Apparently, it all started one day when Boone and some others got caught up in a snowstorm. The animals and all the men perished except for Boone and a man named Burton. They had discovered an empty cabin, but it had no food. According to Boone, he had started trying to light a fire when he heard a bang, only to turn around and see Burton had given up and taken his own life. For hungry Boone, however, the cogs start turning, because like a Little Caesar's pizza, that's some hot and fresh food at his door. He just had to crack open the box, so to speak. Boone would make it out of the winter storm and return to his life of crime, but he wouldn't evade justice forever. He and the rest of his gangle are eventually arrested and brought before a court. Boone tried to defend himself, but it was all in vain, as even the Old West didn't take too well to dudes eating other dudes. He was convicted. Outlaw number 1 is Bill Longley. While the first man on our countdown, John Johnson, targeted indigenous folks for his serial slayings, Bill Longley directed his evil tendencies to mainly African Americans of the Wild West. He grew up in Texas during the Civil War, followed by the period of Reconstruction after the defeat of the Confederate South. And young white Southern men raised with hardened racial opinions seethed over this and often took to heinous crimes. He was one of them. His first confirmed was as a youngin'. 3 freedmen had rolled into town to visit friends and Longley pumped him full of lead for no reason. Brazen act went completely unpunished, so Longley felt he had permission and went on a series of robberies, eventually skipping over state line to Wyoming to enlist in the military for a time, until they kicked him out too, twice. Apparently, he was too violent even for them. So Bill went back to freedmen, and also one of his childhood friends, Wilson, worked his way in there. Even though Bill killed another 12 confirmed people after this, all but 2 being freed African Americans, he isn't arrested until June 6 of 1877 in Louisiana for the Wilson nearly a decade prior. His fame by the stage was global. In London, the Illustrated Police News on November 2nd of 1878 seemed to applaud his criminal stamina, stating, "To be at the age of 26 years after having committed 32 well-authenticated deaths ought to entitle a man to high niche in the temple of fame." The memory, now alas only a memory, of Bill Longley of Texas holds this preeminent position. The paper then goes on to joke that his black people in the plains was like his version of going after big game to Longley. It was a sport where the hunter pursued the hunted just for the thrill of chase, not actuated by some unworthy are by love of filthy lucre, and the seldom even by the violent passion of hatred and revenge. When he killed, it was usually from pure love of his art, out of sheer spirit of wickedness and mischief and nothing else. Alright, thank you once again for watching another Bumblebee video. I hope you enjoyed. Take some time to subscribe to the Hive, drop a like, and maybe some comments down below. I'll see you next time.